I think one of the big issues in general is volatility. You've got market volatility going on now with regard to just overall production and pricing and what's happening out there. Weather volatility, of course. Coming off last year where we've had very, very dry conditions and then going to very wet conditions and nothing's ever quite the same again. Ongoing disease pressures. We think about, everybody's concerned about the price of eggs, and one of those things is we've got avian influenza. That's moving, of course, into dairy cows as a form of influenza. So always that issue of whether it's pests in crops or it's diseases in livestock and animals. We really integrate science, right? So we look at it from what's happening to soil health. We're staying in front of a field of pennycress here. How does that interact with crop systems? How does that come into food systems? And so we're thinking about that full spectrum that is required to take something from its inception, from genetics, for example, and then get that into a usable crop or a usable product that might be out there being adopted by farmers or others in the industry. Big data is becoming really, in practice and use by farmers, it's becoming huge as they're looking to both increase the efficiency of their crop inputs and crop protection or crop nutrients. It's certainly becoming a part of our research as we're able to now identify what's happening down to the molecular level in a crop and selection of genetics. So as we're developing new crops, new varieties, in animal agriculture, looking at genetics and new, of course, growth performance, it's really getting down to that level of understanding what's happening at that really small level. What's interesting about it is it also goes to that macro level. What's happening out there with the weather and the climate, what's happening with water and plant growth and those kinds of things out in the environment. So our ability to go from that very small level to go to the big, what's happening out there in the world, is really having an impact on how we think about agriculture. Farmers have always been looking for that next new thing to improve their bottom line. And as a state, our research we've shown generates between $20 for every dollar invested to $40 for every dollar invested, depending on what it is. So there's a tremendous impact. Every year we do research, every year is a new return to that research. So it carries through time and it sort of builds on itself. Other states don't have that kind of return because, for example, if you're in Arizona, you're in Nebraska, the dry lands, you're having to irrigate, put that equipment out there, you're having to go out and manage droughts that are more frequent. So we just have a place that when we hit agriculture research on the ground here, it has one of the biggest impacts in the country. It's really critical, and I think what people often think is the private sector does a lot of research now, and they do. They're important partners for us. What we do is some of that foundational research. So we're standing out here by this pennycress, and no agribusiness is going to spend 20 years that this has been in the making to do that work. And that builds the foundation for the private sector. If you cut that public funding out from that base foundational piece, that long-term look at it, you're really cutting out those businesses being able to take that research to the next level so a farmer can use them broadly. All of our work in agriculture is built on our natural resources. And I've mentioned water and soils, and they're truly irreplaceable. But then, of course, our forests and our wildlife are part of those natural resources as well. And oftentimes we think of that as recreational. But of course, when we think about forests, a lot of that is it does ecosystem service values. With wildlife, of course, it's a key part of our ecosystems as well, keeping those healthy. And of course, with fishing, fishing and hunters and so on are a key part of that. So our natural resource base, it is, I think people take it for granted, really critical to our research and trying to maintain the sustainability of those natural resources. Our ability to look broadly at what's happening in this intersection between our natural resources, our environment, our food systems, and put that all together now with the science and technology that's there, with big data, for example, and the ability to actually make contributions to that going forward, which is going to be critical for future generations. And I always say, it sounds like a big idea, but University of Minnesota, bring up the Norman Borlaug piece, once upon a time had an impact on the entire world's agricultural systems through research done here. And I think we need a similar type occurrence now. We need to make that investment, make those contributions to assuring we can feed people on fewer resources, we can provide healthier lives and do that on an ongoing basis. There's tremendous interest in sustainability, of course, and that issue of they're looking at their future and their next generation. People from the cities can come here and experience what's happening out there in greater Minnesota, what's happening in their North Woods, what's happening out in our lakes and rivers, so their work is relevant going forward into the future.